Hi everyone and welcome back to another Monday guide. When I did the escort versus patrol mission guide the other week, I realized that there are a lot of misunderstandings on how this mechanic really works, even among the most experienced players. So even though it's a bit of an overlap to my last guide, I thought I'd try to bring some justice to this mechanic and go through how it really works. And I have to be honest and say that I learned some of this stuff quite recently myself as well. So I hope I can share some insights with you guys. I hope you enjoy it. All right, so let's start with a brief overview. If you hit F2 in game, you'll see all your convoy routes going everywhere. Those are the dotted lines you see here on the maps with different colors. And those are basically the ones you want to defend with the Convoy Escort mission. And that's this one over here. So, and just to mention the colors, the white ones are your supply routes. That's where you have supply going to your army somewhere, or your navy or your air force somewhere. The blue ones are resources that you're trading. And then you have, I think they are green ones, that the lend leases, if you have any lend leases going somewhere or receiving. And then you see that some of them are red, and that means that they are currently under attack somewhere along that route. Um, and then, of course, those need to have a little extra defense then, of course. But that's like the basic where you want to use convoy escort missions. And just to point out what I will focus on in this guide is basically three aspects of convoy escort. And the first one is convoy efficiency, which is one mechanic in itself. And then you have the second one is the number of task groups needed. And the third one is the ship designs and the size of the task groups that I will focus on. And it's the second one, the number of task groups, where I experienced that there are a lot of misunderstandings on how this actually works, and the tooltips aren't really that helpful in the guide in the game as well. So it's easy to see how everyone misunderstands this, or many people at least, including myself until quite recently. Um, so I will spend some extra time on that one, but let's take it from the top. So, first of all, you need a certain amount of screens, which is destroyers or light cruisers, to defend your convoy routes, depending on how many convoys you have making the trade or the supply in those given routes. So for example here, I send out this admiral with these four task groups to defend these two zones as an example. And you see we have two routes going through here. One with using one convoy, as you can see in the middle of the screen, and the other one using 11 convoys to transfer resources. So if I then hover on the escort mission here on the percentage, you see that those four task forces that I have under this admiral and the 18 available ships, they are able to escort 315 convoys with my current efficiency, up to 29 sea regions or sea zones, which is, I'm currently in 2 of them. So that's quite efficient as you can see. And if I then, for example, if I would need to cover even more ground, or ground water, then I could also split this one up. If we look at it now, you see that I can cover 29 regions. If I split this up and unpause, you see that I can cover 36 regions because I created one more task group. So this is basically where you can keep an eye out for how many escorts or screens you need on escort mission to be able to fully cover the number of ships you have going over water. And if you don't want to look on every single convoy route, how much they weigh and how much is transferred, you could just hover up here over convoys, and then you can see that in total, as the UK, I'm currently using 167 for trade and 66 for supply. And that's it. So that means in theory that I could cover all my escort needs with this admiral with those convoys I have, or escorts I have here, or screens. Um, that's not sufficient, and I will get to why later, but that's how the efficiency work. Um, if I would be attacked, the efficiency would probably drop because I'm then not fully to cover all the fights or the escorts, or sorry, the convoys going through there. Then you might see, as you saw before here, something turning red. And that means that not everything is coming through as planned. So I will not, for example, receive all the trade that I expect to receive or all the supply that I expect to send somewhere or receive somewhere. And that's and then you can also see that the percentage will drop, and you see that you will not be able to fulfill the escort requirements fully. And also just to add regarding the efficiency is that if you add doctrines, you could increase the number of convoys your screens can escort. So right now I can escort 315, and you see that I have a 5 and 10% modifier already from doctrine. 315. If I then, for example, would go one more step here and add another 15% modifier, you can see that now I can cover 356 convoys with my 18 screens. So that's one way to boost it as well. Before moving on to the really interesting part of this guide, I just want to take a short moment of your time and say that most of you watching this are yet not subscribers to our channel. So please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share, and you'll receive a new guide from me and Boppus every Monday. If you run out of guides and you want more guides, you can become a patron, and then you will receive another extra guide every second week from us as well, on top of an archive where we've already made 24 guides that you'll get right away if you become a patron on Stug 3 tier or upwards. It's in the description below, the link, if you want to check it out. Yeah, let's continue. All right, so now to the really interesting part where I also think a lot of people have misunderstood the mechanic and can complain why it doesn't work and so on. And that is the fact that you need one task group on escort mission covering each convoy route that you have. So how it really works is that one convoy route can only be attacked at one time anywhere along the whole convoy route at a time. So no matter how many submarines someone has on, if you have one convoy route going across the Atlantic, doesn't matter how many submarines they have, they can only attack you at one time at any given moment on that convoy route. And as long as you have one task group, basically like for example these three destroyers here, covering that whole convoy route, you will always teleport into the fight and defend that route. And this sounds quite easy, but then you have to start counting the convoy routes and make sure that you have enough task groups to cover all the routes. So for example, that we're looking at right now, there are 2 convoy routes going through these 2 zones that I want to defend. That means that if I cover both zones, I just need 2 convoy routes, 2 task groups. So I can deactivate all of these and just use these 2 that are active, and then it doesn't matter how many submarines or many task groups of submarines that attack me, because there can only be 2 battles at any given time, and those 2 escort groups will always teleport into those battles as long as they're not home repairing or engaged in another battle, but there won't be any other battle. Unless, of course, it's attacked by a surface fleet or something else like that. But for a raiding purpose, this is all I need. So, how you can then think about this is, and where it gets tricky is because you want to cover all your convoy routes. So the really heavy trafficked areas, that's where you need a lot of task groups. And that's why, for example, the Cape Verde plain is so easily overloaded from the German side or the Axis side. So through this zone here, and I counted this before, are 13 convoy routes going through. That means if I properly want to defend this, I need 13 task groups to defend it. If I would only defend it with these 5 now, that means there will always be another 8 possible battles happening at the same time that I cannot defend if the enemy would attack me with 13 different task groups of submarines. So just to repeat that again, if there are 13 trade routes or convoy routes going through the same zone, if I would, for example, would have 12 task groups defending, there would always be one trade route undefended at any given time because I cannot defend all of the 13 at the same time if they are attacked by, yeah, let's say 20 different task groups of submarines. They will always be engaged probably in 13 battles, and I can only defend 12 at the same time. So that's basically um, how that mechanic works, and that's where you need to start thinking about how many trade routes there are and which zones are prioritized. Let's move over to the third part and add one extra layer of complexity to the escort mechanic. And that's a very important one, and that's the size of the task group as well as the design of your task group. The ships per se, the ships individually, of course, but also the design of the whole task group. And basically, what you need to know is that in a naval battle, and I touched upon this in my last guide as well, but you need actual screening efficiency to cover all the escorts or convoys in a battle. So in this battle I have 6 convoys and I have 7 destroyers. And those 7 destroyers, you can see here that I have 7 screening ships, and I only need 3 of them to be able to cover the 6 convoys in this battle. So with that said, if you want to maximize this and always be sure that you can cover all the screens in all battles and make sure that the submarines doesn't hit them with torpedoes, because submarines will always prioritize the convoys before the screens in any given battle. Even if they try to run away or if they decide to attack, they will always try to go for the convoys first. So if you have a full screen efficiency, then it will be difficult for them to penetrate that screen and hit the convoys then, of course. So what you want to have in the perfect of worlds is then, of course, a task group big enough to always be able to have a full screening efficiency for the convoys. With that said, it's quite difficult sometimes because some of the trade routes, if I hover here, see the rubbish from British Malaya, 96 convoys. That would mean that I would need to sail around with a task group of 40 something, 47 escorts or something like that to be able to fully screen that trade route. And since I can't decide which of the fights those 47 escorts are going into, because they will just teleport into one of the fights, I would need all my task groups to be in 47 then, if I want to be able to cover that one. And that's not manageable or sustainable, of course. So the size of your task group should have some kind of ideal perfect in-between size for the screening purpose. But the real purpose is then, and that's where the design comes into play as well, it needs to be able to scare off the submarines or win against submarines that attack the convoys. That's more important. So some kind of golden in-between rule. And a lot of convoy routes are either like 1 convoy or 5 or something or 6 that goes for supply. So having a small escort group of 4 ships is usually quite decent, I'd say, from my experience. So when it comes to design and when it comes to the battles, there's one more important aspect of this, because a convoy escort mission task group will always come in defensively, because the convoys are being attacked from the submarines, so they are on the defense, and then they will be reinforced with the escorts. So it means that the submarines will always start the battle hidden. If they start the battle hidden, you will need to find the ships in the battle to be able to attack them. So you would need a lot of sub-detection on your escorts if you want to find them and kill them. And then you need depth charges to be able to kill them as well. So ideally, you'll have, and this is, if you want to have good groups, what you want to do is, if I can find it, here we go. You take some of the early light cruisers that you have, as the UK for example, and then what you do is that you just try to fill the upper deck with seaplanes. Because what you see here is that they have 10 surface detection, but they also have 3.5 subdetection. And that's really good, especially early in the game. So you want to make these as cheap as possible, and then you just want to have as many seaplanes as possible, and then add a sonar as well. If you have radar with subdetection, add that as well. There you go, 2 in subdetection. And now you can see this one is up to 23.5, which is really good. And then of course an MIO for Escort as well, and you're golden. So the task group, the subdetection in the task group is an average on all the ships. So you take one of these light cruisers and then you take 3 destroyers, and the destroyers where you can just take the sonar, the radar, and then a lot of depth charges. And then the overall subdetection in that task group will be very high. That's what I think is a very good general subgroup for the early game, or the 39 game, when the war starts in most games. Late game, when you're up to higher techs, I would just use the radar, sonar, and just the destroyers. I wouldn't bother to blend in light cruisers because they're quite expensive. So that's how I would go about it. But it's important to say there's no right or wrong here, and it makes all the difference if you play single player or multiplayer, which I will touch on just in a second. But yeah, so that's one way to think about it at least. And just like I said, playing single player multiplayer makes all the difference in the world on how you want to think about escort mission. Because playing against the AI makes it very predictable. The AI won't do any crazy stuff, like they won't try to overload you and have some odd submarine grouping sizes in the task groups. So usually when you use escorts against the AI, you can just take all the starting destroyers, or the really crappy ones, and make them in a little bit bigger groups, because then they will enter a fight against submarines, and just the sheer number of destroyers will scare the submarines off, so they will try to run away. So you won't be able to sink them probably, but you will be able to always make sure that your convoys get through where they should go through. And then you can use other patrol missions or something like that, better ships to hunt them down, or naval bombers. But that's the most cost-efficient ways to use escort against the AI. When it comes to players, it's a completely different thing if the player is experienced with the raiding game. But they would probably try to overload you in some zones, and the Cape Verde plain is the usual suspect, but also some other zones where all the traffic go through, like the Mediterranean or somewhere else. So then you really have to think about how big are your task groups, like how well can they fight, and how does the enemy group their submarines to raid you. Do they group them in pairs of 1 or 2? Then the size that I said, it will be perfect. Are they grouped in groups of 10 or 15? Then they will probably sink you if they really want to engage you. So then you need bigger groups of destroyers to be able to counter the submarines. So you have to keep an eye on the battles per se and how they group them, and then adapt accordingly as well. So it's a bit more micro in that way, but then once you figure out how the enemy plays, you can just build your escort groups after their designs, or based on how they play. But yeah. All right, to some kind of conclusion. With all of the above said about the escort mission and how it works, don't overthink it. The escort is basically just the backbone to cover all your convoy routes. If you play the UK, Japan, or the US, where you have a lot of trade routes going in all directions, then you need a lot of escorts to cover all them routes going everywhere. And make a standard, make it quite simple, and then just add more of these task groups if you feel that you're under pressure, and then just spread them out everywhere until you have good efficiency. And where you're under attack, you shouldn't be counting on the escorts to solve that problem for you. That's where you use sniper approach. Like you have some task groups where you use patrol missions to go there and clean that up. So you make ideally small hunter groups with carriers, or escort carriers, or some more light cruisers with some more detection, just to find submarines, go on the attack there and clean them up. And then you just think about the escort as a passive backbone of your trade routes or your convoy routes. And if you want to change things up, especially in the multiplayer scene, then you can just go in somewhere, close some zones down, and then if I unpause, you see the routes, they change. And it usually takes quite some time before the raiding player picks this up, because they're usually busy doing other things. So it can easily go a month or two before they realize that you've changed the routes. And then once they reroute to attack you again, then you just change it again. And you can dance a bit, and you don't really have to solve the problem. You can just avoid the problem. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the guide and you learned something new regarding Convoy Escort.